The letter arrived on the same day the summer dust storms turned the Oklahoma sky the color of old rust, and Josephine Miller clutched it in her trembling hands as she stumbled behind the general store where her uncle worked, pressing her back against the rough wooden planks as her vision blurred with tears she could no longer contain. She had been in Oklahoma City for 3 months now, having traveled by stagecoach from her family's failing farm in Missouri after her father's death, left them destitute and desperate, and every week she wrote home to her mother and younger siblings, sending what little money she could spare from her wages as a seamstress in Mrs. Patterson's shop. The letter she held now, however, brought news that shattered the fragile hope she had been clinging to since leaving everything she knew behind. Her mother was sick, terribly sick, and her brother Thomas had been forced to quit school to work in the mines just to put food on the table. Worse still, there was talk of the bank taking their small house, the only thing they had left of her father's legacy. Josephine pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, hot and bitter, soaking through her calico dress as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She was 20 years old and felt as though the weight of the entire world rested on her shoulders, crushing her beneath responsibilities she had no idea how to bear. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Oklahoma City, turning the dirt streets into rivers of powder that coated everything in a fine layer of grit. But Josephine barely noticed the heat or the flies buzzing lazily in the stagnant air. All she could think about was her mother's careful handwriting, grown shakier than she remembered, and the desperation hidden between the carefully chosen words that tried to spare her the worst of it. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until they stopped just a few feet away, and when she finally looked up through tear-blurred eyes, she saw a man standing there watching her with an expression of genuine concern etched across his sun-weathered face. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath a worn hat, and eyes the color of strong coffee that studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow did not. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, denim trousers stained with trail dirt, a faded blue shirt, and boots that had seen countless miles. But there was something in his bearing that spoke of kindness rather than the rough hardness she had come to expect from most men in this territory. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice was low and gentle, with the slight drawl common to men who spent more time with horses than people, and he made no move to come closer, respecting her space even as his concern was evident. Josephine tried to answer, tried to pull herself together and assure this stranger that she was fine, but the words stuck in her throat, and instead another sob escaped, mortifying her with its raw vulnerability. She turned her face away, ashamed to be seen like this by anyone, let alone a man she did not know, but he did not leave as she expected. "I apologize for intruding, miss, but you look like someone carrying a burden too heavy for one person," he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made her believe he understood what that felt like. "My name is Harrison Irving. I work at the Henderson Ranch just outside town, and I was coming to pick up supplies when I heard someone in distress. If there is anything I can do to help, I would be honored to offer my assistance." She looked at him again, really looked this time, and saw nothing but honest concern in his expression. There was no judgment there, no mockery or inappropriate interest, just a simple human desire to ease another person's suffering. And something about that genuine kindness broke through the wall she had built around herself since coming to this lonely place. "It's my family," she managed to say, her voice thick with tears. "Back in Missouri. They're in terrible trouble, and I cannot help them from here. I send money every week, but it is never enough, and now my mother is sick, and they might lose our home, and I do not know what to do." Harrison was quiet for a moment, and then with a movement so gentle it surprised her, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "That is indeed a heavy burden," he said softly. "May I?" He gestured to the space beside her, asking permission rather than presuming, and when she nodded, he settled himself on the ground next to her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long moment they sat in silence, Josephine dabbing at her eyes with his handkerchief, while Harrison simply remained present, not trying to fill the quiet with empty platitudes or false reassurances. The afternoon stretched around them, the sounds of Oklahoma City continuing on as they always did, horses clopping past on the main street, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer, women calling to their children. But in their small corner behind the general store, the world felt somehow separate from all of that. "I came here 3 months ago," Josephine found herself saying, needing suddenly to tell someone the whole story. "After my father died, we had nothing left. The farm was already mortgaged to pay for medical care, and there were 6 of us children. I am the oldest, so I came here where my uncle lives, thinking I could find work and send money home to keep them going until things got better. But things have not gotten better. They have gotten worse, and I am here while they suffer, and I do not earn enough to make any real difference, no matter how many hours I work." "You are doing everything you can," Harrison said, and there was no empty consolation in his words, just acknowledgement of the truth. Sometimes circumstances are beyond our control, no matter how hard we fight against them. That does not make you a failure. It makes you human. "I feel like I am failing them every day," Josephine whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "My mother tried so hard to keep the worst from me in her letters, but I could read between the lines. And now this. Now she is sick, and I'm not there to care for her, to help with my siblings, to do anything that matters." Harrison turned slightly toward her, his expression thoughtful. "May I ask you something, Miss Miller, Josephine Miller? Miss Miller, how old are your siblings?" "Thomas is 17, Mary is 15, Samuel is 13, Rebecca is 11, and the twins, Jacob and Grace, are 8. "And your mother, is she entirely alone with all of them?" "My uncle sends what he can, and the neighbors help when they are able, but yes, essentially, she is alone. Thomas does what he can, but he is working such long hours in the mines that he comes home barely able to stand." Harrison was quiet again, and Josephine could see him thinking, weighing something in his mind. Finally he said, "I may be overstepping, Miss Miller, and if I am, please tell me, but I wonder if you have considered bringing your family here instead of trying to support them from a distance." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "I could never afford that. The stagecoach fare alone for 7 people would be more than I earn in 6 months. And even if I could manage it somehow, where would they live? How would we all survive?" "Those are fair questions," Harrison acknowledged. "But sometimes when we are in the middle of a problem, we cannot see all the possible solutions. Oklahoma City is growing rapidly. The territory is filling with homesteaders and cattlemen, and there is opportunity here if one knows where to look. Your brother is 17, old enough to find work that does not break his back in a mine shaft. Your mother, once she recovers her health, could find employment if needed, or simply care for the younger children while you and your brother work. The twins are old enough to attend the school that opened here last year. But the cost of bringing them here," Josephine protested, even as hope began to flicker somewhere in her chest. "What if you did not have to bear that cost alone?" Harrison asked. "What if there were people willing to help, willing to invest in a family trying to make an honest go of it?" "I could not accept charity," Josephine said immediately, her pride flaring even through her despair. "We are not beggars." "I am not suggesting charity," Harrison replied calmly. "I am suggesting that people help each other, and that help does not always need to be repaid in coin. Mr. Henderson, the rancher I work for, is a good man who believes in giving people a chance. He has been talking about needing to hire more help for the ranch work. Thomas could work there, learn a valuable trade, and earn fair wages. Mrs. Patterson, the seamstress you work for, mentioned just last week that she could use another pair of skilled hands if she knew anyone suitable. Perhaps your mother or one of your older sisters could fill that position once they arrive and settle in." Josephine stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me. For all you know, I could be lying about all of this." Harrison met her gaze steadily. "You are not lying. I can see the truth in your tears, Miss Miller. As for why I would help, well, I suppose it is because I know what it is like to feel alone and desperate. I came to Oklahoma Territory 5 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and a borrowed horse, running from a past that offered me no future. Mr. Henderson gave me a chance when no one else would, and that changed my life. I figure if I can pay that kindness forward, I should. The tears that had begun to slow started again, but this time they were different, mixed with something that felt dangerously close to hope. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything right now, Harrison said gently, but if you are willing, I would like to help you figure out how to bring your family here safely. It will take some planning and time, but I believe it can be done. And Miss Miller, please do not cry alone like this again. Whatever burdens you carry, they do not have to be carried in isolation. Josephine looked at this stranger who had appeared in her darkest moment like something out of a dream and felt something shift inside her. She was still frightened, still overwhelmed by the circumstances crushing down on her. But for the first time since arriving in Oklahoma City, she did not feel entirely alone. Without thinking about propriety or what was proper, she turned toward Harrison, and he must have seen the need in her eyes because he opened his arms slightly, offering without presuming. She moved into that embrace hesitantly at first, but when his arms closed around her, strong and warm and somehow safe, she let herself lean against his chest and cried the tears she had been holding back for months. Harrison did not speak, did not try to shush her or tell her everything would be fine. He simply held her, one hand resting gently on her back, the other cradling her head, and let her grieve for all the losses and fears she had been carrying alone. They stayed like that as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Oklahoma City. Josephine cried until there were no more tears left, until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw. And through it all, Harrison held her with a patience and tenderness that she had not known since her father died. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by her display and by the wet spot her tears had left on his shirt, he simply handed her his handkerchief again and gave her a small smile that held no judgment. "Feel better?" he asked quietly. "A little," she admitted, her voice hoarse, and very embarrassed. "Do not be. Tears are not weakness, Miss Miller. They are proof that you care deeply about people you love. That is strength, not shame." She studied his face, trying to understand this man who spoke with such certainty about kindness and strength. "You are not like most cowboys I have met since coming here." Harrison's smile turned slightly wry. "I will take that as a compliment. Most cowboys are good men underneath the rough exterior, but they have learned to hide their softer feelings behind tobacco and bravado. I never quite mastered that particular skill." "I am glad you did not," Josephine said, and meant it. She looked down at the letter still clutched in her hand, the paper now wrinkled and stained with her tears. "Do you truly think there is a way to bring them here?" "I do, but it will require planning, and it will require you to trust me enough to let me help you. Can you do that?" Josephine thought about it, weighing this stranger's offer against her desperate need and her ingrained caution. Everything she had been taught told her to be wary of men who offered help with seemingly no expectation of return, but when she looked into Harrison's honest eyes, she did not see deception or hidden motives. She saw only genuine desire to ease her burden, and something else she could not quite name, something that made her heart beat a little faster. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I can trust you." The smile Harrison gave her then was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, warm and genuine, transforming his weathered features into something almost beautiful. "Good. Then let us make a plan. But first, you should probably get back to the shop before Mrs. Patterson worries. May I walk you there?" They stood together, brushing the dust from their clothes, and Harrison offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his rough cowboy attire. Josephine took it, grateful for the support because her legs still felt shaky, and they walked together around the general store to the main street of Oklahoma City. The town stretched before them in the golden light of late afternoon, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up with remarkable speed as the territory opened to settlement. Oklahoma City had only been founded a few years earlier during the land run of 1889, and it still had the raw, unfinished quality of a place inventing itself as it grew. The streets were unpaved, turning to mud in rain and dust in sun, and buildings ranged from sturdy structures of milled lumber to hastily constructed tents and shanties, but there was energy here, a sense of possibility that drew people from all over the country, seeking fresh starts and new opportunities. Mrs. Patterson's seamstress shop occupied a narrow building between the land office and a boarding house, distinguished by the cheerful yellow curtains in the window displaying samples of dressmaking and alterations. As they approached, the door opened and Mrs. Patterson herself emerged, a round woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that took in every detail of Josephine's tear-stained face and Harrison's supporting presence. "Josephine, child, are you all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "You have been gone for over an hour. I was starting to worry." "I apologize, Mrs. Patterson," Josephine said quickly. "I received some distressing news from home and needed a moment to compose myself. This is Mr. Irving. He was kind enough to offer assistance when I was upset." Mrs. Patterson's sharp gaze turned to Harrison, assessing him with the practiced eye of a woman who had lived long enough to judge character quickly. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because her expression softened slightly. "That was kind of you, Mr. Irving. I know you work for the Henderson Ranch. They speak well of you." "They are generous in their praise," Harrison replied politely. "Mrs. Patterson, I wonder if I might have a word with you sometime about employment opportunities, not for myself, but for a potential new arrival to Oklahoma City." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose with interest. "Is that so? Well, I am always looking for skilled workers, as Josephine well knows. I have more orders than 2 pairs of hands can manage. Come by tomorrow afternoon if you like, and we can discuss it properly." "Thank you, madam. I will do that." Harrison tipped his hat to her, then turned to Josephine. "Miss Miller, thank you for allowing me to be of service. With your permission, I would like to call on you tomorrow evening after I speak with Mrs. Patterson so we can continue our discussion about your family's situation." "I would appreciate that very much," Josephine said, and felt heat rise to her cheeks at the knowing look Mrs. Patterson gave her. "I lodge at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house, just down the street." "I know it. Until tomorrow, then." Harrison tipped his hat again and walked away with the long, easy stride of a man used to covering distance on foot, leaving Josephine standing on the boardwalk with her employer's curious gaze boring into her. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said after a moment, "that is an interesting development. Harrison Irving is known as one of the most decent men in Oklahoma City, but he is also known for keeping to himself. I do not think I've ever seen him pay particular attention to a young lady before." "He was only being kind," Josephine protested, but she could not quite keep the flutter out of her voice. "I was upset, and he offered help. That is all." Was all Mrs. Patterson said, but her eyes twinkled with amusement. "Come inside, child. You can tell me about your troubles while we work, and wash your face. Your eyes are red as berries." That evening, after a long afternoon of stitching hems and taking in waistlines while Mrs. Patterson listened to her story with sympathetic clicks of her tongue, Josephine walked back to her boarding house feeling lighter than she had in months. The letter from home still weighed heavy in her pocket, but Harrison's offer of help had kindled something inside her that she had thought extinguished by months of grinding worry and loneliness. Mrs. Cooper's boarding house was a 2-story structure that housed 6 female lodgers, all working women like Josephine, who had come to Oklahoma City seeking independence or necessity or both. Mrs. Cooper herself was a widow who ran the establishment with firm fairness, providing clean rooms and decent meals in exchange for reasonable rent. She looked up from her knitting as Josephine entered the parlor, her weathered face creasing with the same concern everyone seemed to show her today. "You have a letter, I see," she observed, nodding toward the crumpled paper Josephine still carried. "Bad news from home?" Josephine nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying again, and Mrs. Cooper set down her knitting with a sigh. "Come sit down, girl. You look done in." They sat together in the quiet parlor while Josephine told her story for the second time that day, and Mrs. Cooper listened with the same patient attention she gave to everything. When Josephine mentioned Harrison's offer to help bring her family to Oklahoma City, the older woman's expression grew thoughtful. "Harrison Irving is a good man," she said finally. "Lost his own family back in Texas, from what I hear, though he does not speak of it. Come here alone about 5 years ago and has worked hard ever since. If he says he will help you, he means it. But Josephine, you need to be careful too. A young man helping a young woman the way he is proposing, people will talk. They will assume things." "What kind of things?" Josephine asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "That he expects something in return beyond your gratitude. That there is an understanding between you. I'm not saying his intentions are anything but honorable, mind you. I'm just warning you that in a town this size, people notice everything and gossip spreads faster than wildfire." Josephine felt her cheeks heat again. "I had not thought of that." "Of course you had not. You are too worried about your family to think about much else. But I am thinking of it for you because you are a good girl and I do not want to see your reputation damaged. So here is what I suggest. If Mr. Irving is serious about helping you organize bringing your family here, let him do so in a proper public way. Let him speak to the necessary people, make the arrangements, but you make sure there are always witnesses to your interactions. Do not meet him alone anywhere that could be misinterpreted. And Josephine, if his help comes with expectations you are not comfortable with, you come tell me immediately." "I will," Josephine promised, grateful for the older woman's practical wisdom. "But Mrs. Cooper, I truly do not think Mr. Irving has any ulterior motives. He was so respectful, so kind, and he asked permission for everything." "Then he is even rarer than I thought," Mrs. Cooper said with a small smile. "But my warning stands. Kindness is wonderful, but caution is wise." That night, lying in her narrow bed, in the room she shared with another boarder who worked at the hotel, Josephine stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. The day had begun with crushing despair, and somehow ended with the first real hope she had felt since leaving Missouri. Harrison Irving's face kept appearing in her mind, the way his dark eyes had looked at her with such genuine concern. The strength and warmth of his arms when he had held her while she cried, the gentle patience in his voice when he spoke to her. She barely knew him, she reminded herself firmly. One afternoon of kindness did not make him a saint, and she would be foolish to put all her faith in a stranger's promises. But even as she thought it, she remembered the way he had sat beside her without demanding anything, offering comfort with no expectation of reward. And something inside her insisted that Harrison Irving was exactly who he appeared to be, a genuinely good man in a world that often seemed short on them. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness as Josephine worked on an elaborate dress for the banker's wife, her fingers flying automatically through the familiar motions while her mind spun with thoughts of what Harrison might discover in his conversations, whether his help would truly lead anywhere or turn out to be empty hope. Mrs. Patterson watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing until mid-afternoon when Harrison arrived at the shop, hat in hand, to speak with her as promised. Josephine tried not to listen too obviously as they spoke in the front room of the shop, but it was impossible not to hear Harrison's deep voice explaining the situation, asking if Mrs. Patterson would consider hiring Josephine's mother or sister once they arrived in Oklahoma City, offering to personally vouch for their character and work ethic. Mrs. Patterson's responses were thoughtful, asking practical questions about skills and experience, and when they finished talking, she called Josephine out from the back room. "Mr. Irving has made a compelling case," she said, her expression businesslike but not unkind. "If your mother or sister have seamstress skills as you do, I would be willing to hire one of them on a trial basis once they arrive. The pay would be the same as what you earn now, and if the work is satisfactory, the position could become permanent. Would that help your situation?" "Yes," Josephine breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "Oh yes, Mrs. Patterson, that would help tremendously. My mother taught me everything I know about sewing. She is far more skilled than I am." "Good. Then we have a potential position waiting. Mr. Irving, was there anything else you needed to discuss?" Actually, yes, I spoke with Mr. Henderson this morning about Josephine's brother Thomas. He is willing to hire the boy on at the ranch as soon as he arrives, with room and board included in addition to wages. The work would be hard, but it is honest labor learning to manage cattle and horses, skills that will serve him well in this territory. He would be working alongside me, and I give you my word I will see that he is treated fairly and taught properly. Josephine felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude rather than despair. Mr. Irving, I do not know how to thank you. This is far more than I ever hoped for. There is no need for thanks yet, Harrison said, but she could see pleasure in his eyes at her reaction. These are just the first steps. We still need to arrange transportation for your family and find suitable housing once they arrive. I have been thinking about that as well. There is a small house on the Henderson property that has been sitting empty since the previous foreman moved on. It is not large, but it has 3 rooms and a good roof. Mr. Henderson said your family could use it rent-free for the first 6 months, after which they would pay a modest amount that could be deducted from the combined wages you, your brother, and your mother would be earning. Would that be acceptable? Acceptable? Josephine could hardly speak around the lump in her throat. It would be a miracle. But Mr. Irving, this is too much. You are doing too much for people you do not even know. I am doing what I hoped someone would do for my family if our positions were reversed, Harrison said simply. Now, as for the transportation costs, that is the more difficult piece. Stagecoach fare for 7 people from Missouri to Oklahoma City would indeed be expensive, probably close to $200. I have some savings, and I thought perhaps we could arrange a subscription among the townspeople. Oklahoma City has a charitable society that helps new settlers get established. I plan to speak with them tomorrow. Mrs. Patterson had been watching this exchange with sharp interest, and now she spoke up. Mr. Irving, your generosity is admirable, but I think Josephine's concern about accepting what amounts to charity is valid. These are proud people from what she has told me. Might I suggest an alternative arrangement? Please do, madam. What if we structured this as a loan rather than a gift? The family could repay the transportation cost over time once they are all settled and earning wages. It might take a year or even 2, but it would allow them to keep their dignity while still receiving the help they need. I would be willing to contribute $50 towards such a loan as an investment in a future employee. Harrison's face lit up with understanding. That is an excellent idea. I could contribute another $50 from my savings, and if we could raise the remaining $100 through subscriptions with the understanding that it would be repaid as the family is able, that would solve the problem while respecting their pride. I will repay every penny, Josephine said fiercely. Every single penny, I swear it. And my family will too once they understand what you have all done for us. I have no doubt of that, Mrs. Patterson said briskly. Now, Mr. Irving, I believe you mentioned wanting to call on Josephine this evening to discuss these matters further. You are welcome to do so here at the shop rather than at her boarding house. That way I can chaperone, which will prevent any unfortunate gossip. Harrison nodded gravely, though Josephine thought she saw amusement flicker in his eyes. That is very thoughtful of you, Mrs. Patterson. Would 6 o'clock be suitable? Perfectly suitable. Josephine and I will be finished with work by then. You may use the front room, and I will be in the back but within earshot. Propriety must be observed. After Harrison left to attend to his errands, Mrs. Patterson turned to Josephine with a satisfied expression. That young man is either the most genuinely kind person in Oklahoma Territory or he is falling in love with you, possibly both. Now stop standing there gaping like a fish and get back to work on that dress. The banker's wife wants it by Friday. Josephine returned to her sewing in a daze, her mind whirling with everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. Could it be possible that her family's desperate situation might actually be resolved? That her mother could recover her health in this new place? That Thomas would not have to break his back in the mines? That her younger siblings could have a chance at education and opportunity? It seemed too good to be true. And yet Harrison had already accomplished so much in a single day that she was beginning to believe in miracles again. When 6 o'clock came, she was watching the door with barely contained anticipation, And when Harrison entered, bringing with him the smell of dust and horses in the outdoors, her heart did something strange in her chest that she did not entirely understand. He had cleaned up since the afternoon, she noticed, his face freshly shaved and his hair combed back, though he still wore his working clothes because men like Harrison Irving did not own fancy Sunday suits. They sat in the front room of the shop with the door open and Mrs. Patterson visible through the doorway to the back, bent over her sewing but clearly listening to every word. Harrison pulled out a small notebook and a pencil, businesslike now as he went over the details of what needed to be arranged. "I spoke with Reverend Matthews at the community church," he said, writing notes as he talked. "He coordinates the charitable society I mentioned. He agreed to present your family's case at the next meeting, which is Saturday. I gave him a full accounting of your situation, and he seemed confident that the townspeople would be willing to help, especially once they understand it is structured as a loan rather than charity. He also mentioned that the church has furniture and household goods donated by various families that your family could have to set up their house." "This is moving so fast," Josephine murmured, almost afraid to believe it. "Just yesterday I thought there was no hope at all." "Sometimes when the right people come together with the right intentions, things can move quickly," Harrison replied, and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I also took the liberty of drafting a letter to your mother. If you would like to review it, I thought you could send it tomorrow on the morning stage. It explains the arrangements we are making and asks her to prepare the family to travel as soon as we can send the money for their passage." He handed her several pages of neat handwriting, and Josephine read through them with growing amazement. Harrison had somehow managed to explain everything clearly and respectfully, striking exactly the right tone of offering help without condescension, emphasizing the loan structure and the jobs already arranged, making it sound like a practical business arrangement rather than charity. He had even included details about the house, the school for the younger children, and the growing opportunities in Oklahoma Territory. "This is perfect," she said softly when she finished reading. "You write very well, Mr. Irving." He ducked his head almost shyly. "My mother was a school teacher. She insisted all her children learn to read and write properly. I'm glad the skill is useful now." "You mentioned losing your family," Josephine ventured carefully. "May I ask what happened, or is that too painful to discuss?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer, but finally he said, "Cholera epidemic when I was 19. It swept through our town in Texas and took my parents and younger sister within a week. My older brother survived but went west to California shortly after. We have not spoken in years. I came to Oklahoma Territory because I could not bear to stay in the place where I had lost everyone I loved. So you see, Miss Miller, I do understand something of what it is like to feel alone and helpless in the face of circumstances beyond your control." "I am so sorry," Josephine said, and without thinking she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his notebook. "That is a terrible loss to bear." Harrison looked down at her hand on his, and very slowly he turned his palm up and gently closed his fingers around hers. It was the most intimate contact they had shared beyond the embrace yesterday, and Josephine felt warmth spread through her entire body from that single point of connection. They sat like that for several heartbeats, hands clasped, eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them that felt significant and profound. From the back room, Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat loudly, and they both jumped, snatching their hands back like guilty children. Harrison's ears turned red, and Josephine felt her own cheeks burning, but neither of them could quite suppress their smiles. "I should probably go," Harrison said, gathering his notebook. "But Miss Miller, Josephine, if I may call you that, I want you to know that helping your family is important to me, but getting to know you is equally important. I hope that once all these practical matters are settled, you might allow me to call on you properly, with courtship in mind, I mean, if that would be welcome." Josephine's heart seemed to stop and then start again at double speed. "That would be very welcome, Mr. Irving. Harrison." His smile then was worth all the trials of the past months, brilliant and unguarded, transforming his whole face. "Good. That is very good. I will call on you again tomorrow with news from the Charitable Society. Until then, Josephine." After he left, Mrs. Patterson came into the front room with her arms crossed and an expression of exasperated fondness on her face. "Well, I suppose that answers the question of his intentions. That boy is smitten with you, Josephine Miller, thoroughly and completely smitten. And unless I am very much mistaken, you are equally smitten with him." "I barely know him," Josephine protested weakly. "Sometimes knowing happens fast when the person is right," Mrs. Patterson said. "My late husband proposed to me after 3 weeks of acquaintance, and we had 37 happy years together before the fever took him. I'm not saying you should rush into anything, mind you, but I am saying that when a good man looks at a woman the way Harrison Irving looks at you, she would be foolish not to pay attention." Over the next 2 weeks, Oklahoma City watched with interest as Harrison Irving and Josephine Miller's story unfolded. The charitable society meeting resulted in enthusiastic support for the loan fund, with various townspeople contributing amounts ranging from $5 to $20. The banker himself donated $15, saying that he admired a family willing to work hard to pull themselves out of difficult circumstances. By the end of the week, they had raised $150, more than enough to cover the stagecoach fare for all 7 family members with money left over for supplies. Harrison arranged for the money to be wired to the stagecoach office in the Missouri town closest to the Miller family farm, and Josephine sent letters with detailed instructions and the date by which her family should be ready to travel. The response came back faster than expected. Her mother wrote that she was already feeling somewhat better just from the relief of knowing rescue was coming, and that Thomas was giving notice at the mine immediately. They would be ready to leave Missouri within the week. During this flurry of activity, Harrison and Josephine saw each other nearly every day, always with Mrs. Patterson or Mrs. Cooper or some other chaperone present. But the connection between them deepened with each conversation. They talked about everything, discovering shared values and dreams, arguing amiably about whether chickens or cattle were more practical for a small homestead, laughing over stories from their childhoods, falling silent sometimes just to look at each other with wonder at how quickly and completely they were falling in love. "I never expected this," Josephine admitted one evening as they sat on the porch of Mrs. Cooper's boarding house with 2 other residents doing needlework nearby. "When I came to Oklahoma City, I thought I would work and save money and eventually go back to Missouri. I never imagined I might build a life here, or that I might meet someone like you." "Life has a way of surprising us," Harrison said. "Sometimes in terrible ways, as we both know, but sometimes in wonderful ways too." "You are my wonderful surprise, Josephine. The best thing that has happened to me since I came to Oklahoma Territory." "We have only known each other 2 weeks, Wamare," she reminded him, but her protest was half-hearted. "I knew within 2 hours that you were special," Harrison replied. "The rest of the time has just been confirming what I already understood in my heart." On a warm August morning, the entire Miller family arrived in Oklahoma City on the midday stage, dusty and travel-worn, but eyes bright with anticipation and nervous hope. Josephine was waiting at the stage depot with Harrison beside her, and when her mother stepped down from the coach, thin and tired but smiling through tears, she flew into her arms with a cry of joy. The reunion was emotional and chaotic, with siblings embracing and talking over each other. Thomas shaking Harrison's hand with firm gratitude, the twins exclaiming over every sight in the unfamiliar town. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Cooper had come to welcome them as well, and even Mr. Henderson himself had driven in from the ranch with a wagon to transport the family and their meager belongings to the little house that would be their new home. Harrison lifted the twins into the back of the wagon and helped Mrs. Miller onto the seat beside Mr. Henderson, his easy kindness with her family making Josephine's heart swell with affection. Thomas climbed up to sit with his younger siblings, but Harrison insisted that Josephine ride in the wagon as well, since she had not seen her family in months and deserved this time with them. The little house on the Henderson ranch was indeed small, with one main room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 tiny bedrooms off the back, but to the Miller family it looked like paradise. It had real glass windows and a sturdy door, a cast-iron stove for cooking and heating, and furniture donated by various church members, rough but serviceable. Mrs. Henderson herself arrived shortly after they did, bringing fresh bread, butter, milk, eggs, and a basket of vegetables from her garden, refusing to leave until she had helped them put away supplies and made sure they had everything they needed for their first meal. Josephine stood in the doorway watching her family explore their new home, seeing the wonder and relief on their faces, and felt tears sliding down her cheeks for the third time since meeting Harrison Irving, though these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. She felt him come to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "They are here," she whispered. "They are really here. It does not seem possible." "It is possible because you never gave up on them," Harrison said quietly, "and because you were brave enough to accept help when it was offered. That takes a different kind of courage than facing things alone." She turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life so completely in such a short time, and saw in his eyes everything she was feeling reflected back at her: love, wonder, hope, and something deeper that she was only beginning to understand. Before she could think better of it, before caution or propriety could stop her, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and soft, then stepped back with burning cheeks. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Harrison raised one hand to touch the spot where her lips had been, his expression almost dazed. "Josephine Miller, you are going to be the death of me in the very best way possible." The weeks that followed were busy ones as the Miller family settled into their new life in Oklahoma Territory. Thomas took to ranch work with enthusiasm, rising before dawn to work alongside Harrison and the other cowboys, learning to rope and brand and handle the massive herds of cattle that were the Henderson Ranch's primary business. He was young and strong, and the outdoor work built muscle on his frame and brought color back to his face after the pale months underground in the Missouri mines. Mrs. Miller, whose name was Jane, and who insisted Harrison and all the other helpers call her by her first name, rather than standing on formality, spent her first week in Oklahoma City simply recovering her strength and learning to navigate the town. Once she felt better, she presented herself at Mrs. Patterson's shop and demonstrated sewing skills that made even that exacting woman's eyes widen with approval. Within the hour, she was hired not only as an employee but as a full partner, with Mrs. Patterson proposing they expand the business together to meet the growing demand for dressmaking and tailoring services in the rapidly growing town. The younger children thrived in the new environment. Mary, at 15, proved to have a talent for figures and was hired part-time at the general store to help with bookkeeping. Samuel and Rebecca started school enthusiastically, and the 8-year-old twins, Jacob and Grace, became popular fixtures around town, charming shopkeepers with their matching grins and innocent curiosity about everything they saw. Through all of this, Harrison and Josephine's courtship progressed with deliberate propriety but unmistakable intensity. They went on chaperoned walks through town, attended church services together with her family, sat on various porches in the evening talking about their hopes and dreams. Harrison was invited to Sunday dinners at the Miller house, where he patiently answered Thomas's questions about ranch work, played simple games with the twins, and treated Jane Miller with the respect due a beloved mother-in-law, though no formal engagement had yet been announced. It was in early October, when the brutal Oklahoma summer had finally broken into cooler autumn weather, that Harrison asked Josephine to go riding with him, with Thomas coming along as chaperone. They rode out from the Henderson Ranch in the golden afternoon light. 3 horses moving easily across the rolling prairie that stretched endlessly toward every horizon. Oklahoma Territory was beautiful in its own stark way, all big sky and waving grass, and Josephine had come to love it with a passion that surprised her. Harrison led them to a spot where a small creek cut through the grassland, creating a ribbon of green cottonwood trees that offered shade and the musical sound of running water. They dismounted and let the horses drink while Thomas tactfully wandered downstream to examine something he claimed to find interesting in the rocks, leaving Harrison and Josephine standing together under the golden leaves. "I've been waiting for the right moment to say something," Harrison began, and Josephine noticed that his hands were not quite steady as he turned to face her. "Though the truth is, there probably is no perfect moment, and I do not want to wait any longer. Josephine, these past months, knowing you have been the happiest of my life. Watching you with your family, seeing the strength and love you show them every day, getting to know your heart and mind and spirit, it has all confirmed what I knew from that first afternoon when I found you crying behind the general store. I love you. I am deeply, completely, irrevocably in love with you. Josephine's heart was beating so hard she could barely hear his words over the rushing in her ears, but she heard enough. I love you too, Harrison. I think I started loving you when you sat beside me and did not try to fix everything, when you just let me cry and held me until the tears stopped. Harrison's smile was radiant with relief and joy. I was hoping you might say that, because there is something I want to ask you, and the answer matters more to me than anything else in my life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth, and when he unfolded it, Josephine saw a ring, simple but beautiful, a single small garnet set in a gold band that glowed in the autumn sunlight. "This was my mother's ring," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "The only thing I kept from my old life. She would have loved you, Josephine. She would have been so happy to know that I found someone like you. Josephine Miller, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me?" "Yes," Josephine said through the tears that seemed to come so easily whenever Harrison said or did something that touched her heart. "Yes, Harrison, I will marry you. I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting all these years for her specifically. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, really kissed her for the first time, and Josephine felt herself melting into him, her hands coming up to clasp behind his neck, his arms tight around her waist. The kiss was sweet and passionate and tender all at once, full of promise and desire and deep, abiding love. And when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers and laughed with pure happiness. "When you are?" he asked. "How soon can we be married? Because now that I know you will be my wife, I do not want to wait any longer than absolutely necessary." "What is the minimum time required for propriety?" Josephine asked, giddy with joy. "I have no idea, but I intend to find out immediately." Thomas's voice drifted up from downstream, carefully casual. "I am assuming from the excessive silence that congratulations are in order." "You assume correctly," Harrison called back, his arms still around Josephine's waist. "Your sister has agreed to marry me, which makes me the luckiest man in Oklahoma Territory." Thomas came striding back, grinning widely. "Welcome to the family, Harrison. Though truthfully, I have been thinking of you as family for weeks now. When is the wedding?" "As soon as humanly possible," Harrison replied. "Within reason and propriety, of course." It turned out that as soon as humanly possible meant 6 weeks, which was the shortest engagement period Reverend Matthews would agree to, insisting that even though everyone in town knew Harrison and Josephine were perfect for each other, proper forms must be observed. Those 6 weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations with Mrs. Patterson and Jane Miller collaborating on a wedding dress that was the finest work either of them had ever produced, Mrs. Cooper organizing a reception at the boarding house, and the entire town of Oklahoma City seeming to take ownership of the upcoming nuptials. Harrison moved through those weeks in a state of barely suppressed impatience, counting down the days until he could call Josephine his wife. Mr. Henderson, amused by his best worker's distraction, gave him a raise and offered him the position of ranch foreman, which would come with a larger house on the property, perfect for a newly married couple starting their life together. The wedding took place on a bright November morning, cold enough that Josephine's breath made clouds in the air as she walked down the aisle of the simple church, but she did not feel the chill at all. She saw only Harrison standing at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in a new suit that Mrs. Patterson had insisted on making for him as a wedding gift, his dark eyes fixed on her with such love and devotion that she felt like she was glowing from within. Thomas walked her down the aisle, having claimed that privilege as the man of the family. And when he placed her hand in Harrison's, he whispered, "Take care of her, or you will answer to me." "I will guard her with my life," Harrison whispered back, and Thomas nodded, satisfied. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, conducted by Reverend Matthews with the entire congregation of the church present, plus what seemed like half the town of Oklahoma City. When Harrison said, "I do," and Josephine echoed him, when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Harrison kissed her with the joy of a man who had found his home at last, the church erupted in applause and cheers that probably violated some protocol, but made the moment perfect. The reception at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house was lively and loud, with food contributed by dozens of families, music provided by a fiddler who lived on a neighboring ranch, and dancing that went on until late into the evening. Josephine danced with Harrison, with her brother, with Mr. Henderson, and even Reverend Matthews, laughing until her sides hurt, feeling more completely happy than she had ever been in her life. As the evening wound down and the guests began to drift away, Harrison pulled Josephine aside, away from the noise and celebration. They stood on the porch of the boarding house where they had spent so many chaperoned evenings courting, but everything was different now. Now she wore his ring and his name. Now they would go home together to the foreman's house that Mr. Henderson had prepared for them. Now they belonged to each other in every way. "How is it possible to be this happy?" Josephine asked, leaning against Harrison's chest as his arms came around her from behind. "After everything that seemed so hopeless just a few months ago, how did we get here?" "We got here because you were brave enough to cry where someone could see you," Harrison said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "because you trusted me when you had no real reason to. Because we both chose to hope even when hope seemed foolish." "Do you remember exactly what you said that first day?" Josephine turned in his arms to look up at him. "You said I should never cry alone again. You said whatever burdens I carried, they did not have to be carried in isolation." "I remember," Harrison said softly. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever life brings us, Josephine, we face it together. Your burdens are my burdens. Your joys are my joys. That is what it means to be married, to be partners, to be one." She kissed him then deep and long, and felt his response, the tightening of his arms around her, the quickening of his breath. When they broke apart, his eyes were dark with desire, and her own body was responding in ways that made her glad they were finally, properly married, and could explore these new feelings without shame or restraint. "Take me home, husband," she whispered against his lips. "Take me home and show me what it means to be yours." Harrison's response was to sweep her up into his arms, making her laugh in surprise and carry her down the steps toward the wagon that would take them to their new house. Behind them, they could hear applause and cheering from the remaining guests, and someone called out good-natured teasing that Harrison answered with a wave, but no pause in his stride. The foreman's house that would be their home was modest but comfortable, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft bedroom above, furnished simply but with everything they needed. Someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had been there earlier and left candles burning in the windows and flowers on the kitchen table. The bed in the loft bedroom was covered with a new quilt that Josephine recognized as the work of the church ladies' quilting circle, made specially for them. Harrison set her down in the kitchen, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other, suddenly shy despite the months of courtship and the fact that they were now legally married. Then Harrison cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with exquisite gentleness, taking his time, savoring her, and Josephine felt the nervousness dissolve into something warmer and more confident. They climbed the stairs to the loft together, and in the privacy of their bedroom, with moonlight streaming through the window and nothing but the sounds of the Oklahoma night around them, Harrison Irving and Josephine Miller Irving began their married life with all the passion and tenderness and love they had been saving for this moment. The months that followed established the rhythm of their life together. Harrison worked the ranch as foreman, managing the other cowboys and overseeing the cattle operations, while Josephine helped her mother at the expanded seamstress shop that was now called Miller and Patterson Fine Dressmaking. Thomas continued to work at the ranch and showed such promise that Mr. Henderson began talking about eventually making him a partner in the operation. The younger children thrived in school and in the community, becoming as much a part of Oklahoma City as families who had been there since the land run. Winter came with surprising cold, and Harrison and Josephine spent their evenings wrapped in quilts by the fire, talking and reading, and simply enjoying each other's company. They took Sunday dinners with her family most weeks, and those gatherings were loud and joyous, full of laughter and stories and the comfortable chaos of a large family that loved each other deeply. In early spring, Josephine realized she was pregnant, and the news sent Harrison into a state of protective anxiety that would have been annoying if it had not been so endearing. He wanted to carry her everywhere, forbid her from working, wrap her in cotton, and keep her safe from any possible harm. She had to firmly explain that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities, though she did allow him to fuss over her more than was probably necessary. Their daughter was born in October of 1891, exactly 1 year after Harrison had proposed by the creek. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Harrison paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, terrified by the sounds of his wife's pain, until Jane Miller finally took pity on him and let him inside to hold Josephine's hand. His presence seemed to help, and when the baby finally arrived, red and squalling and perfect, Josephine wept from exhaustion and joy while Harrison stared at his daughter with an expression of absolute wonder. They named her Helen Jane Irving, after Harrison's mother and Josephine's mother, and she was adored by every person who met her. Thomas made her a wooden cradle with his own hands. Mrs. Patterson sewed tiny dresses trimmed with lace. The twins insisted on helping with everything and had to be gently discouraged from holding her constantly. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, attentive and tender with his daughter in ways that made Josephine fall in love with him all over again. She would watch him rocking Helen to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice, and feel such overwhelming gratitude for the life they had built together that sometimes she could hardly breathe with it. 2 years later, their son was born, a robust baby they named Henry Thomas Irving, after no one in particular, but simply because they liked the strong sound of it. Henry was easier than Helen had been, both in birth and temperament, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfectly right. Harrison now had both the daughter who wrapped him around her tiny finger and the son he could teach to ride and rope and manage cattle, and he loved them both with fierce devotion. The Miller family continued to flourish as well. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property in 1893, and they built a house near the main Henderson Ranch buildings. Mary married the general store owner's son and took over the bookkeeping for his expanding business. Samuel and Rebecca, as they grew into young adults, showed no signs of settling down yet, but were popular and successful in their respective pursuits. The twins, Jacob and Grace, remained inseparable and were now making plans to attend the new territorial college together. Jane Miller married again in 1894, shocking everyone, including herself, to Reverend Matthews, who had been courting her with patient determination for over a year. The wedding was a joyful affair, and Josephine was delighted to see her mother happy again, clearly in love and beloved in return. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Harrison and Josephine rode out to the creek where he had proposed, leaving the children with Jane for the afternoon. It was another golden autumn day, much like that earlier one, and they stood in nearly the same spot, arms around each other, looking out at the prairie that had become home. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Josephine asked. "If I had not received that letter when I did, if you had not come around the corner at that exact moment, if you had simply walked past instead of stopping to help?" "I think about it sometimes," Harrison admitted, "and it terrifies me how easily we might have missed each other, how much my life would have lacked if I had never found you crying behind that store, never had the privilege of holding you until your tears stopped, never got to love you and build this life with you." "I was at my lowest point that day," Josephine said softly. "I thought I had nothing left to hope for, and then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. You gave me back my family and gave me a new family all at once. You gave me love and home and purpose. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment when you chose kindness over indifference." Harrison turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his eyes full of the same love she had seen there 5 years ago. "The kindness went both ways, Josephine. You let me help you, which gave my life meaning again. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You loved me when I had convinced myself I did not deserve to be loved. You gave me Helen and Henry and a future I never dreamed I could have. You are my miracle, and I thank God for you every single day." They kissed there by the creek, a long, slow kiss full of 5 years of shared life and love, and the promise of many more years to come. Around them, the Oklahoma prairie stretched endlessly, golden in the afternoon sun, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed and wind whispered through the grass, the sounds of the Wild West that had become the soundtrack of their lives. That evening they returned to their home, which was no longer the small foreman's house, but a larger structure they had built with their combined savings and Harrison's labor on evenings and weekends. It had 4 bedrooms now, and a proper parlor, and a kitchen with a real cook stove. Helen and Henry came running to meet them as they rode up, full of stories about their day with Grandma Jane, and Harrison scooped them both up at once, one child on each arm, making them shriek with laughter. Josephine stood watching her husband and children, framed by the house they had made together, and felt the same overwhelming gratitude that had become a constant presence in her life. She thought about that younger version of herself, crying alone behind the general store, convinced her life was nothing but struggle and loss and sacrifice. If she could speak to that girl now, she would tell her that the tears would eventually stop, that help would come from the most unexpected places, that love was waiting just around the corner in the form of a kind-eyed cowboy who would change everything. The years continued to unfold with all the complexity and richness of any well-lived life. There were challenges, of course. A drought in 1896 that tested the ranch's resources and required everyone to work harder than ever. An illness that swept through Oklahoma City in 1898, taking several lives, though thankfully sparing the Irving and Miller families. The ongoing evolution of Oklahoma Territory toward eventual statehood, which brought both opportunities and complications. But through everything, Harrison and Josephine faced life as they had promised together, their love deepening and maturing like good wine, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. They added a 3rd child in 1897, another daughter they named Rose, who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determination. They prospered, not becoming wealthy, but achieving the kind of solid, comfortable success that came from hard work and wise decisions. Harrison eventually became a partner in the Henderson Ranch, as Mr. Henderson had no children of his own and considered Harrison like a son. Thomas partnered with him, and together they expanded the operation, adding horse breeding to the cattle business. The Miller and Patterson dressmaking business grew as well, eventually expanding to a 2nd location in a nearby town, with Mary Miller managing the new shop. Helen grew into a spirited young woman who could ride as well as any cowboy and had ambitions to study medicine, shocking and delighting her parents in equal measure. Henry showed promise as both a rancher and a scholar, reading voraciously while also demonstrating skill with horses and cattle. Little Rose was still finding her way but showed early signs of having her grandmother Jane's head for business. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1900, the new century dawning with all its promise and possibility, Harrison and Josephine hosted a huge celebration at their home. The party included both their families, friends from across Oklahoma Territory, and the various business associates they had accumulated over the years. It was a testament to how far they had come, how much their lives had expanded from that afternoon behind the general store when everything had seemed hopeless. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them with music and laughter and dancing, Harrison drew Josephine away from the crowd and walked with her to the edge of their property where they could see the lights of Oklahoma City twinkling in the distance and the vast star-filled sky above. 10 years, Harrison said, holding her close. 10 years since I found you crying and somehow convinced you to trust me. 10 years since my life began again." "Our life," Josephine corrected gently. "Everything we have built, we built together. The business success, the children, the home, all of it required both of us working as partners." "True," Harrison acknowledged. "But you were the catalyst, Josephine. You were the one who reminded me that it was possible to hope again, to love again, to build something meaningful from the ruins of loss. I gave you practical help with your family's situation. You gave me back my heart." Josephine leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers, marveling, as she often did, at how completely this man had become her home. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" she asked. "I think about all the other women who might have been crying that day, in other places, behind other buildings, and wonder if anyone stopped to help them. I think about how much random chance there was in our meeting. What if you had taken a different street? What if I had gone somewhere else to cry? It seems impossibly fragile." "Maybe it was not chance," Harrison suggested. "Maybe it was fate or providence or whatever you want to call the force that brings the right people together at the right time. I prefer to think we were always meant to find each other, that somehow across all the miles and years and circumstances, our paths were destined to cross exactly when and how they did." "I like that thought," Josephine said. "It makes our story feel even more special." "Our story is special because we chose to make it so," Harrison replied. "Yes, we met by chance or fate, but everything that came after was choice. You chose to trust me. I chose to help you. We chose to love each other. We chose to build this life together. Those choices matter more than any external force pushing us together." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, listening to the sounds of celebration from their home, thinking about the 10 years behind them and the unknown years ahead. Oklahoma Territory was changing rapidly, moving toward statehood, and their children would grow up in a world very different from the Wild West of their own youth. But some things remained constant: the love between husband and wife, the bonds of family, the satisfaction of work well done and life well lived. "Well, I love you, Harrison Irving," Josephine said, not for the first time and not for the last, but with all the depth and certainty of a decade of shared life. "I loved you when you held me that first day until my tears stopped. I loved you when you proposed by the creek. I loved you when you held our children for the first time. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond, if love can extend past the boundaries of life." Harrison's kiss was his answer, deep and passionate, and full of all the emotion he sometimes found hard to express in words. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become their private signal of intimacy and connection, and whispered, "You are my everything, Josephine, my wife, my love, my partner, my home. Thank you for crying where I could find you. Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for choosing me." They returned to the party hand in hand, greeted with cheers and calls for a toast. Harrison raised his glass and said, "To my wife, Josephine, who gave me more than I ever knew I needed and loved me better than I ever thought possible. May we have 50 more years together building on the foundation we have laid." The crowd raised their glasses and echoed, "To 50 more years." And though they could not know it then, they would indeed have those years, or very nearly. They would see Oklahoma achieve statehood in 1907 and celebrate with all the pride of pioneers who had helped build something from nothing. They would watch their children grow to adulthood and have children of their own, filling their lives with grandchildren who adored them. They would weather the challenges that time brought, illness and loss and change, but always together, always partners, always in love. Helen would go on to study medicine as she dreamed, becoming one of the first female doctors in the new state of Oklahoma. Henry would take over the ranch operation and expand it further, becoming one of the most successful cattlemen in the region. Rose would marry a banker and help found the first women's business association in Oklahoma City, using her grandmother Jane's head for figures and her mother's determination to effect real change. But all of that was still to come. On this night, their 10th anniversary, Harrison and Josephine danced together as they had on their wedding night, moving easily in each other's arms, speaking without words in the way longtime partners do. Around them, their family and friends celebrated, the children ran and played, and the Oklahoma night embraced them with the same vast possibility it had held since the land runs first opened this territory to settlement. The Wild West was taming, slowly but inevitably becoming something more settled and civilized. But in the hearts of people like Harrison and Josephine Irving, the spirit of those early days remained. The courage to face uncertainty, the willingness to help strangers, the faith that kindness and hard work could build something lasting and good. Many years later, when they were old and their children were grown and their grandchildren were starting families of their own, Harrison and Josephine would tell the story of how they met. They would describe that afternoon behind the general store, the letter from home, the tears that would not stop, and the cowboy who chose kindness over indifference. They would tell about the help he offered and she accepted, about the love that grew from that foundation of practical assistance and mutual respect, about the life they built together against all odds. And their grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, enchanted by this tale of romance and rescue, asking to hear it again and again. They would ask their grandfather, "Grandpa Harrison, how did you know Grandma Josephine was the one?" And he would smile and say, "Because when I held her while she cried, it felt like coming home. Because when she trusted me with her burdens, I knew I would spend my life being worthy of that trust. Because love is not always lightning bolts and poetry. Sometimes it is sitting beside someone in their darkest moment and saying, 'You are not alone anymore.'" And they would ask their grandmother, Grandma Josephine, "Were you scared to trust him?" And she would smile and say, "Terrified. But sometimes being brave means taking a risk on kindness. Sometimes it means accepting help even when pride says you should manage alone. I took that risk, and it gave me everything I have now. It gave me your grandfather, your parents, and eventually all of you. The best things in life often come from the moments when we are most vulnerable, and someone chooses to meet that vulnerability with compassion." On a spring morning in 1940, 49 years after their wedding, Harrison Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Josephine holding his hand as she had held it so many times before. He had lived a full life, a good life, surrounded by love until his last breath. At his funeral, which was attended by what seemed like half of Oklahoma City, people spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family and community, his willingness to help anyone in need. But Josephine knew the truth of who Harrison had been better than anyone. He had been the man who stopped when he heard someone crying, who offered help with no expectation of return, who kept every promise he ever made. He had been her partner, her love, her home for almost 50 years, and his loss left a hole in her heart that would never fully heal. She lived another 7 years after Harrison's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and active well into her old age. She continued to tell their story to anyone who would listen, wanting to make sure that people understood what real love looked like, how it was built on foundations of kindness and choice and daily commitment, rather than just passion and romance. On an autumn afternoon in 1947, sitting on the porch of the home she and Harrison had built together, surrounded by her daughter Rose and several grandchildren, Josephine Miller Irving closed her eyes for the last time at the age of 76. Her last words were, "He is waiting for me. My cowboy is waiting to hold me again." They buried her next to Harrison in the Oklahoma City Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read simply, "Harrison and Josephine Irving, partners in life and love. Their story began with tears and ended in joy." And indeed it had. Their story, which began with a young woman crying over a letter from home and a kind cowboy who held her until the tears stopped, became one of the founding legends of Oklahoma City, told and retold through generations. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of community, and the enduring nature of true love. It proved that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that helping hands extended in genuine kindness can change lives, and that love built on foundations of respect and partnership can last a lifetime and beyond. Their descendants still live in Oklahoma, carrying forward the values Harrison and Josephine lived by: the commitment to helping others, the belief in hard work and integrity, the understanding that family and love are what give life meaning. The ranch Henry inherited still operates, now in its fourth generation of family management. Helen's medical practice became a clinic that serves low-income families, run now by her granddaughter. Rose's Women's Business Association evolved into a major force for female entrepreneurship throughout the state. But more than any professional legacy or material success, what Harrison and Josephine left behind was the story itself, the tale of two people who met by chance or fate, who chose love when they could have chosen isolation, who built something beautiful from circumstances that seemed bleak and hopeless. They left behind the understanding that life's greatest moments often come from simple acts of human kindness, that tears shared are tears halved, and that sometimes the person we meet in our darkest hour turns out to be the light we were searching for all along. And so the story endures, passed down through generations, told and retold with love and pride. The story of the cowboy who found her crying over a letter from home, who held her until the tears finally stopped, and who loved her for the rest of their lives. The story of Harrison and Josephine Irving, whose love changed not only their own lives but the lives of everyone around them, rippling outward in ways they could never have imagined on that dusty afternoon in Oklahoma City when fate and choice combined to bring two lonely hearts together and make them whole. Their story reminds us all that kindness matters, that love is worth the risk, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do for another human being is simply to be present in their pain, to hold them through the tears, and to promise them they will never have to face their burdens alone again. It is a story of the Wild West, but also a timeless story of human connection, proving that while landscapes and circumstances change, the fundamental truths of love, compassion, and partnership remain constant across all eras and all places. And if you visit Oklahoma City today and ask the older residents, some of them will still remember hearing their own grandparents tell the story of Harrison and Josephine, will still be able to point to the spot where the general store used to stand, where two lives intersected and changed forever. They will tell you that love like that is rare but real, that it is worth believing in, worth striving for, worth holding onto with both hands when you find it. They will tell you that the Irving legacy lives on, not just in descendants and businesses and properties, but in the values they lived by and the love they shared so openly that it inspired everyone who knew them. That is the power of a good love story. It transcends time and place, speaking to something universal in the human experience, the deep need we all have to be seen, to be held, to be loved, through our darkest moments and our brightest joys. Harrison and Josephine's story does exactly that, reminding us that sometimes salvation comes not in grand gestures, but in simple presence, not in solutions, but in solidarity, not in fixing, but in bearing witness to another's pain and choosing to share the burden. The cowboy found her crying over a letter from home, and he held her until the tears finally stopped. In doing so, he gave her hope. She gave him love. Together they built a life that became a legacy, and their story, like all great love stories, reminds us that our own stories are still being written, that kindness still matters, that love still conquers, and that the person we need most might appear in our darkest hour if we are brave enough to let ourselves be found.